All right. Hello, everybody. It is Sunday, April 27th. Angela and Regina here with Women's Personal Finance doing our eco-frugal month in conjunction with Earth Month panel here with some of the other creators we know and love who we know like to talk about intersections of sustainability and finance and related topics. So this is new for us versus last year to do something with a panel, and we're pretty excited to get a little more interactive and see what other people are thinking about some of these things we like to talk a lot about. As a reminder, if any money discussions do come up, at least me and Angela are not financial professionals. This is just educational, informational content and peer interaction. So I will pass it over to Angela to also say hello, and then we'll do some panelist introductions.
Yeah. And for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with women's personal finance, though if you're here, you probably are. Regina and I are the two halves of the same brain, really focused on, this is Eco-Frugal Month, but for us, it really is Eco-Frugal Earth Month year round. We met online in 2017, I believe, when we were both blogging separately with blogs about financial independence, but also very much underconsumption, preparedness, sustainability, and whatnot, and definitely bonded over what was, a more similar shared perspective about the world than a lot of the online money spaces. And, came together with Women's Personal Finance, and now we are here and really excited to have three folks here with us on this panel today. They are all online content creators themselves, and we wanted to give each of them a little bit of time to introduce themselves. And I'm just going to go in the order that I see you pinned on my screen. So Alexa, that means you are first.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Alexa Pavan. I am Go Green with Alexa on Instagram and all the platforms. But basically, I talk about imperfect sustainability and how to infuse fun and creativity into your life while also being mindful of like our choices and our consumption overall. I don't specifically talk about finances, but I do feel like there is a huge part of what I talk about has to do with finances, and I do center a lot of what my content is focused on purchasing power and making sure we shop small and local when possible.
Welcome.
I'm in Florida, by the
Oh,
way.
go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Forgot to mention that part.
Shalise.
So my name is Shalise. I'm also known as Neurodivergent Millionaire. I was formerly known as Autistic Travel Goddess, but I moved on from travel blogging to incorporate some more financial literacy for neurodivergent people because I realized that a lot of this financial advice out there that will help us to be able to get the money to travel is very much neurotypical white cis male center. And so we needed to talk about this from a neurodivergent and autistic perspective.
Muted, Angela.
I was gonna say, and WPF definitely skews pretty neurodivergent, especially with the folks that lean into our communities. So it was great. We had Shalise on for a woven chat at some point. Time has no meaning
October.
anymore. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to say within the last year, but beyond that, I wasn't going to be able to tell. But I can also find and drop that link in the chat for anyone who wants to go find it, or you can find it on our YouTube as well. And then Laura's been on Woven as well as talked to our WPF Insiders community. So welcome back, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I am glad to be here. I'm so glad this conversation is taking place. I just think that there's so much potential at this nexus of sustainability and personal finance. And I think people are eager to have this conversation. I think people are often just like, wow, I didn't even know that was a conversation we have. I wouldn't know what to put in Google to find this conversation, but it's something I want to delve into. So yes, my name is Laura Oldaney. I too am based in Florida. I'm a green living and money coach, founder of Rich and Resilient Living, and I am the co-author of this book called Growing Free, and our subtitle is Building the Life of Your Dreams Without Losing Your Soul or Destroying the Planet. And it is, if you're familiar with permaculture, it is the permaculture, personal finance, and lifestyle design book that so many people are hungry for when they get to permaculture, because you get those visions of that life. But it's like, well, how do I make it financially viable without compromising my values? And so that's what we delve into the book. So I say that I help reluctant capitalists design fulfilling and financially resilient and climate resilient lives. And again, I'm very happy to be here. and yes, I will add a link to the book into the chat as we're talking.
Oh yeah,
Thank you.
and Shalise, where are you located for everyone?
Oh, I'm in Atlanta, currently in Georgia.
So man, we're either, northwest or southeast here today. We gave up on the rest of the country.
I know, right? And I also, real quick, have a book out called Neurodivergent Millionaire.
Oh yeah.
Against the Status Quo. And I titled it that way just because we, as neurodivergent people, we have to go against what's known as the status quo in order to find fulfillment and find what we consider as wealth to us. The neurotypical way
someone in the chat says they have your book, Shalise. So
yay!
Did you get it
Yeah.
after Shalise came and talked to us, or is that completely separate from WPF related activities? Let's see if we get an answer there.
Oh, no,
Ah.
completely separate. That's
Nice.
even more fun.
Oh,
Worlds
Awesome.
colliding. So yeah, we'll drop
thank you
both
so
book
much.
links in the chat. So it's really fun. The internet is such a big, wide place, and yet then we can, find each other too. And, we're all over the country. We have, people from all over the world, and it's fun to realize that we're having a lot of the same conversations. It can sometimes feel very isolating and very lonely. And as much as there's problems with the internet, I think there's also a lot of magic in finding each other online.
And
Gina, you want to?
I was looking for both of your book links from Bookshop to drop those, and I'm guessing they're both self-published. I didn't see
They
either on Bookshop, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you'll have to drop.
Actually,
wait, you get.
My book
On
is
Bookshop?
on Bookshop, but we sell it independently as well. We published it independently. So I did put that in the chat.
Oh, good. I
Bookshop.
missed that while I was looking, and I see yours, Shalise. So,
So where's Bookshop at?
bookshop.org.
Oh, okay.
And they, I'll be perfectly honest, we're maybe slightly diving into some related questions here for our panel. I know a portion of their profits go to independent booksellers, and beyond that, I'm not really sure why it's like how it works if you're ordering just direct from them or if like they help fulfill it through independent bookstores. But it is definitely what we hear from anybody who's into independent bookstores, that is the link to drop that does the best for them.
We actually have an insider who runs a bookstore in North Carolina, and she said that if you can pick whatever bookstore like in the country, and then you buy it through them, and Bookshop gets a little portion, and so does the indie bookstore, which is really rad.
If we're not picking a bookshop, maybe how does that link work? Like, where does it get fulfilled from if you don't select as a bookstore?
I think it's random, maybe. It might be like who's closest. I don't know. We should figure it out.
Now we're going to have something to dig on because we use bookshop links every week in the newsletter, and we just do it because everybody who knows more told us that's the way. But now I'm curious. So
I love that. I love it.
All right. Well, should we start diving into some of our questions?
Let's
Yeah.
do it.
All right. I will admit we don't do a lot of panel discussions. We've been on panels, but we haven't hosted very many panels. So bear with us, even though we think this is fun and we'd like to do more. So one of the first questions we wanted to dive into in this conversation was, how do you navigate the pressure to buy more, especially in a world that encourages us to spend to show our social status or for our own instant gratification? So if anybody's ready to hop on that, go ahead. If not, maybe we'll call.
I can jump to the microphone.
All right, Laura.
So one of the things I think that is so important with this is to get clear for each person on what a wealthy life looks like to you. So you don't get distracted by all of the latest trend gadgets that your friends have that don't add real value and meaning to your life. And in fact, by buying them, you are diverting yourself from your progress towards that vision of a truly wealthy life. I think, I love Donella Meadows and systems thinking for anyone who's familiar with that. And I think, when you get to these higher level leverage points, we can really make big impacts in our lives. And for me, that getting clear on what the wealthy life looks like to me and not my parents, not my friends, not society, then I can be more laser focused on it and less swayed and influenced to spend my money on these trivial trinkets and items that really are only consuming energy and resources, and are likely going to end up in a landfill or the waste stream, as opposed to directing my energy resources, my financial resources, and just, the limited time I have on this earth towards what really makes me feel rich and wealthy. And I think for most of us, when we ponder that, we see that it's not the big yachts and mansions and the things we're led to believe that a wealthy life looks like.
And
So,
you just,
Laura, what does that include? What's on your wealthy life list?
So for me, the ultimate luxury is time in nature. And that can be as simple as just eating lunch outside most days here in Florida, or foraging fruit. It's funny, I mentioned this in my latest YouTube video. I do a lot of dumpster diving because I'm so upset by all the waste in the waste stream. And people probably look at me at the dumpster on a Tuesday morning and feel sorry for me, but I'm outside, I'm physically active, I'm getting free food, and I'm having fun. It's adult treasure hunting. That is a wealthy life to me, not being in a cubicle pursuing success over spreadsheets and, meetings. It's just, so, again, for me, there's more to it, but the big one is nature and the ability to be outside in the fresh air and walking barefoot.
Shalise?
you know what, Laura just hit the nail on the head when she spoke about wealth being outside of the status quo, like yachts and the material items, because that's actually what I talk about in my first chapter. But for me, wealth, I would add to that wealth means the ability to not be reliant on ableist systems and, being in a situation to where you don't have to rely on an ableist employer and you can, say what you want on social media without having to worry about being misconstrued and fired. You can be in a place where you don't have to mask and pretend to be neurotypical. And so these, along with this idea to where I don't have to have massive payments or get into debt for something, having the ultimate time freedom, the freedom to, be able to spend my money on traveling and exploration and having this life where I don't have to be reliant on systems that discriminate against me or they're ableist toward me.
Alexa, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they had both great answers. I would say my answer is in the intersection of those two, which is like, yeah, have a plan for your life, a vision for your life, and a why for what, like your how you want to spend your money. Because I think that's the key. Like Laura had mentioned, don't frame it around the life that your parents laid out for you or your friends, because if you look at those people's lives, do you really want to swap lives with them? Most of the time, I think the answer would be no. And I think we just need to really think about who we are as people and know yourself. And then from there, you can create a plan and you just have to stick with that plan. And it takes a little bit of discipline, but I think it's also exciting to see that plan develop and unfold before you, because you're making those conscious decisions every day.
I can add for me, interestingly, because most of the things that I have, if we're talking about pressure to buy, which is usually more about physical items, so almost everything in my home is secondhand because I've been hunting and thrifting since I was like in middle school. And to be honest, I don't really feel any of that pressure at this point because I'm already overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that I do have. So there's not a lot of pressure to buy when I look around and am honestly feeling a little like pressured by what's already in my home. So I'm in my mid 30s and I'm already looking at how to how to unburden myself from more things.
I don't know that 38 counts as mid 30s anymore, Regina.
Is it late? It's middle late.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Anything from you, Angela? We're gonna move into next.
Yeah, I guess that's where I love rounding up and telling people you're 40 when you're almost 39. I love people that are totally into their ages. I digress, but I think it also, the pressure to do all the things that everybody wants to do. If you really are okay with being weird and different, I think it's a lot easier to not feel the need to do this stuff. Like I've been the weird kid my whole life, and not ever trying to be something different has always done me really well. So like it can be hard and scary, but also if you really don't care if you're seen as weird, and starting with smaller weird stuff, like I think the more you lean into certain weird stuff, it gets easier to do more weird stuff. So like if people already see you as doing strange stuff, then doing more strange stuff. Like Laura, I'm sure like with your dumpster diving, like
oh, there's
people
Laura
think
again.
you're weird. Yeah, I know. But if you're totally good with being weird, it's I think a lot easier to let go of the stuff that just feels like everybody has because everybody's got to have it.
All right. Well, this one's a little probably more applicable for those of us who don't feel as much of the external pressure. In a world full of eco-friendly, quote, products, how do you sift through all that to help make sure your purchases are genuinely sustainable, whatever that means, because that's a pretty wide term, but both ethically and financially?
So one of the ways I like to do my research is to see if the company that produces the product, how are the working conditions. I'll go on Glassdoor and see what it's like working for this company, see what the labor is like, what they're being paid. And then, if it's good reviews, if the employees are happy, then I don't mind purchasing that product or continuing to purchase that product. And then I also look at how much bang I get for my buck and, if I can keep being able to justify buying that product.
For me, it's more about, so in the first place, I'm kind of an essentials person. I don't really, any extra money is kind of going to savings, investing, or traveling. And if it's not any of those categories, then it's basically just like essential things I need, like shampoo. So when it comes to figuring out, like, I'm sorry, I had just a blank moment there for a second. But essentially, I try to just focus on smaller brands primarily. I like when they're not private equity owned. So I do a lot of research. I'm like, the first thing I search when I'm like, oh, this brand seems cool. Let me look into it a little bit more. Who are they owned by? I try to shop with brands that are owned by the founder or, family owned type of thing, owned by the original person who created it. Because a lot of times what happens is the brand gets bigger and then they sell out to private equity. Not my favorite. I end up just shifting to a different brand who has not sold. So that's my biggest thing is like I really care about who owns the business. And then, of course, I look into their values and how those values manifest in the products or the service that they're selling. Because it's really easy to say you care about this, that, and the other, but if you don't like, you care about the environment, but your packaging is all plastic, then obviously you're not aligned with your values. So it's really just like seeing what their values are and what they are interested in, and then like as far as like what their business is aiming for, and then just going back and double checking. Like it sometimes can take a trial and error period. I try to give myself like, okay, I'm going to buy this brand one time, and if I like it, I'll buy it again. But if not, I kind of move on, and I would never recommend anything that's like I had mentioned before, like not a small shop or things like that. So it's really just, yeah. And someone said in the chat, Grove Collaborative, a lot of people like to bring up, oh, Grove's a great option for sustainable products. I said, not to me, not anymore. So I think that there are plenty of small brands out there that are selling things at around the same price point that are ethically sourced and more, I don't know, just more mindful of their production. So I think it's, yeah, starting there.
And I think Alexa and Shalise gave very good answers that when I get to the point of buying something, I have similar thought processes, but I really, really, really try to not get to the point of buying anything. It's probably much more so than many people. And I don't mind a little bit of discomfort. I think we need more discomfort and less convenience in this country, in the world. Uh, I try to make my first instinct things like whatever I think I need, putting DIY and whatever it is into a search engine and seeing what what answers I get. I just needed a stain remover. I wasn't happy with the seventh generation stain remover. So there it was. It came up, hydrogen peroxide, baking soda, and dish soap. I had all three of those items that I rescued from the waste stream. And I made my own stain remover. I needed QR code stands to vend at an event, my book, and I didn't want to buy plastic QR code stands. So DIY QR code stands, that was my search. And then I found these wooden options that my boyfriend could make with me from wood he rescued from the side of the road. You know, I can borrow things from neighbors. I'm in a buy nothing group. I don't, so much of what we think we don't need it every day of our lives. So how else can I have access to it temporarily? So my first line of defense is really to either question, do I really need it? Going without some things people might not think they can go without, finding ways to, make it myself if I can from what I already have. And, again, borrowing it somehow from a neighbor, from the through a buy nothing group or some other means.
So I think part of that too is that like when you have fewer things you're actually buying, it's a lot easier to go through that kind of level of sourcing and thinking differently. Whereas if you're buying stuff all the time, the level of exhaustion to try and do that for everything single thing takes a lot. But if you're only buying like one thing a week or a month or whatever, you have a lot more bandwidth to do the deep dive. Whereas if there's constantly stuff you're trying to buy, like it is too much to try and do it. So I think, Laura, you're really, the point of when you're buying fewer things, you can also be more mindful with how you get them. I do also want to come back to Alexa's comment about small businesses. And I know that especially people who live in redder areas will say that like, I really tried to do the small business, but they're just as misaligned with me as the big ones. And honestly, I still think that the small business is the right decision in that situation. Even if they are exactly aligned politically or ethically, they don't have the same power as the megacorps. So even the really bad small business, they may have a small bad locus of control, but they are not pushing for big scale, like large scale change, like the really big corporations. So sometimes when it can feel like it's like they're both evil, the small evil still doesn't have the same reach as the big one.
I may have a slight counterpoint there. I know a lot of small businesses lean one way or the other, but if I'm going to support them, largely has to do with how vocal they are about it. If they're very vocally against things that are important to me, then I am unlikely to support them. Personally, I can say I probably have avoided having to think about this too much. I still buy a lot of stuff, but I try to buy used as much as possible. So most of the only things that I'm really buying new in my house are foods, and then some of the daily type consumables, washing detergents and things like that. And I could do better in some of those areas myself. Mostly I buy what I can at Costco and just keep it at that one shop for those things, and just work really hard to make most of my other purchases be secondhand and reduce the footprint that I have there. One of the places I've started to think more about it is some of the clothing purchases that I'm bringing in. I'm being a lot more aware when I do minimally bring in a few new items. Like I am now committed to a certain brand of merino wool underwear. And they're, as much as it can be, one of the more ethical, sustainable focused brands, thinking more about footwear and things like that. So I think you can do it slowly, and like once you start to build the habits of thinking about it, then it gets a little easier to slowly build it in over time versus pick one area to focus on. And for me right now, I'm trying to do that with my clothing purchases. But the more I do it there, the more I feel like I need to start doing it in other areas that I buy things. Okay, let's see. Was there any exciting chatter in the chat, Angela, that we should cover? And I'll point out.
I would say Shalise was also talking about also trying to buy like disabled and Black owned businesses when you're also looking small, that it's not just like, are they ethically there, but also are you not buying just from cis white dudes?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And places that are going to think about those things tend to be better overall. If they're willing to lean into one area, I think there are also people who are going to try to be more conscious about a lot of the business practices. So yeah, there are some good tricks you can use nobody's perfect, right? Like I don't know if we're going to get to the no conscious consumption question, but like we know that nothing's perfect, but there can be some of these like quick ways you can screen to try to get into groups of businesses to support that are going to be better than average.
Yeah.
Can I just say something and follow up to the discussion about the buy nothing groups? Because there were some people, now that they've gone, if they don't have the app, but they're still restricted to Facebook. I just put in the chat Simbi.com. And it's not exactly a buy nothing group. It's actually, if anyone's familiar with time banking, it's almost like a global time bank, where the currency is time, not money. And so many of the exchanges, it started out with just online exchanges, professional service exchanges, but they're trying to bring people together in local communities for in-person exchanges of goods and services. So for those of you who aren't able to, work through a buy nothing group, you can check on Simbi.com and see if there's any action, any people registered in your area on that platform.
And Laura does talk more about her time banking efforts in her recording that she did for Woven, I think. So maybe we can find the link and drop it. And if not, we can pull it up and reference it on a post on Woven later. So. All right. So since we are talking about eco-frugal month, which is a phrase that we use quite a bit, and we do see some other people out there on the wider internet use it as well. So it's not a super common term, but it's not unique to WPF. But I think has maybe some different meanings depending on who you talk to. We will ask, how does embracing eco-frugality empower us to build wealth? And what role does mindful spending play in financial independence?
Can you say it one more time, Regina, just so I make sure?
Yeah. How does embracing eco-frugality empower us to build wealth? What role does mindful spending play in achieving financial independence?
Well, it's very much what Laura was saying earlier. Much like Laura, I have everything in my house is secondhand, and like you mentioned, Regina, everything's secondhand in my house, and my clothes, I would say 90% of my closet is secondhand. So I feel like that helps a lot. I didn't have to pay for any of those, or I didn't have to pay for the clothes, to be honest, because that was from my sisters and my friends, and the couches and the stuff that I got at such a reduced rate almost feels like I got it for free, just because like I got a couch for $200 that easily would go for 2000. And especially so like it's things like that where eco-frugality and building wealth I feel like go hand in hand, and that's something I'd love to talk about on my page, because when like you're making those mindful choices, you're not going to spend frivolously, and you're going to be more conscious of where you're putting that purchasing power. And like we all mentioned before, we don't really look for things like that. We're not really interested in gathering material things just to have them. So I think by nature, we are in a great place to just save a lot of money and also allocate it to the right places.
And I would say overall, when you're conscious and you're having the mental bandwidth to actually look and see what it is you're purchasing and investigate all facets of it, you overall just spend less money because you're buying less stuff. Like the math just ends up being less.
Exactly.
I guess I'm gonna veer a little different here, just because I'm not sure if it'll come up in another question. In terms of building wealth and keeping this kind of eco-conscious, eco-frugal perspective, I approach it in two ways. So I know the question is about mindful spending, and I think we've touched on that a little bit already. But for me, eco-frugality, yes, that's a big part of it goes most directly to spending. But I think when we think about eco-consciousness, sustainable living, there's so much more to think about connecting it to building wealth than just reducing our spending. Because there's this whole unexplored realm of regenerative wealth, sustainable wealth. We talk about stores of value in conventional personal finance, and we can talk about sustainable stores of value. We can invest in our skills, useful skills that will make us more financially resilient and climate resilient, skills that will earn us money and save us money. It's so much bigger to me than just not spending. Again, if we're going for that systems thinking, that higher level thinking, it's got to be more than just mindful spending. We are at the precipice of some really bad stuff, and it can't just be about eco-frugal tweaks. As much as I love them, we've got to get to the higher leverage points, and we've got to, again, a big part of it is starting with what does a wealthy life look like to me, but then it's really redefining wealth. What does true wealth look like on a climate challenged planet? It's not the conventional view of wealth. That is the view of wealth that has gotten us to where we are. So we really have to reframe what wealth even is in these circumstances. And for me, again, it's those skills, it's community, it's the skill of building and being in community with people that are very different than me, have different backgrounds. It's planting a useful, productive tree in my yard as part of my retirement planning. It is really starting to go out in the middle of a storm and seeing how the water is moving across my property, because I need to protect my house, which is my major financial asset. And I need to know what's happening in my community here in Florida when there's a hurricane. How's the water flowing through the streets? What risk is my property at? And I have to be out there in the midst of it to figure that out. And it's just, and health. I think health is such an important form of wealth for a climate resilient future. It's going to be hotter, and I don't know how to do this without being ableist. I don't mean to be ableist with this, because I think healthy people really need to step it up and maintain their health so that we can help the people who are going to need us. We have to be able to tolerate heat. We have to be able to move around in hard conditions. And we spend so much of our life focused on working a soul-crushing shitty job, depleting our health to save up the money to afford healthcare later in life. It's so distorted. And we really have to reshift and reframe things. So sorry, I'll get off my
No, that's okay.
soapbox now.
You
made
know,
a lot of
Laura,
good points.
that topic is one I've thought about, something related to it, and I sometimes vent to Angela about it. Like there's a lot of ways we're very, very imperfect in my household in the things we consume and the things we do. And especially when it comes to things related to like health by like, health savvy standards. And I have said time and time again that I would much rather do a lot of imperfect things with my health, like not eat organic foods all the time and have the ability to not have to work full time to afford that. Because I think being in control of my time, having time to get outside and take a walk, even if I'm eating a pesticide laden piece of fruit here and there, is probably better for my health long term than being stuck in a chair in an office for 40 years. Um, so yeah, again, really like rethinking that bigger picture on like what does health really mean, or branching out of like what is this immediate thing that is talked about that can make me healthy, and instead thinking about like what are the things that are actually making me unhealthy that I then have to go try to spend a bunch of money or effort to fix. Like and that's a probably could be devoted to its own hour plus of conversation, because that health I don't know. I don't have the words today, but like that vein of marketing is so huge. And there are so many things that are sold to us to try to get us to buy back our health. When if we just took a very different perspective on how we go about life, we would be more likely to maintain our health, and it's a lot less expensive.
I might have to quote you on that later. I like that whole concept of buy back our health, yes, as opposed to maintaining it in the first place.
Yeah.
Mm.
I had some other thoughts because you always inspire lots of things to think about, Laura, but that was the one that was top of mind when it was time to open my mouth. So
So this was not on our list of questions, but since Laura kicked it off, I'm curious what everyone here has to say about this. And we talked about a little bit earlier about comfort. And when we're looking forward to a very, climate change impacted planet, Regina and I talk a lot, offline and online about how, part of what's gotten us here is putting comfort above everything else. And we think that, eco-frugality and paying attention to sustainability stuff not only means that you're going to lean into some of that discomfort now, but long term, we're all likely going to have to live differently than we do now. And if we're already practicing that discomfort muscle and living more simply and living more in tune with like the day to day, is going to be easier when we have to rather than now when we get to. That's not really a question, I guess, but I'm sure everyone has thoughts on this.
Riff on that.
Our obsession with convenience is why we now have Klarna for DoorDash takeout.
Yeah.
This is why we're in this predicament, because people are obsessed with convenience and getting everything they want, without any planning ahead, just instant gratification.
oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Oh, instant gratification is the problem in this society, and it goes hand in hand with that whole comfort. And it makes me wonder, everyone who was defending this, Klarna and DoorDash, everyone who was defending this so vehemently, it makes me think to myself, when we really do have to live uncomfortable, when we really do have to get uncomfortable, are these people going to be surviving? Like, are they going to be able to survive, or are they going to perish?
Yes. And I will say that, we have this impression, we have these words, inconvenience and uncomfortable. But I think a lot of the things I do, like I said with the dumpster diving, it adds richness to my life. You know, the things that we think are convenient when we just sit and be lazy in front of a video game or streaming Netflix with our food delivered to us. And then we wonder why we're depressed, you know, or don't have friends, or relationships, or never go out. It's like so much of what I do that people would consider an inconvenience or uncomfortable, you know, it's bringing joy to my life, or it's like improving my physical and mental health. It's just or it's helping me push back against capitalism and live according to my values. You know, it's good for the planet. I call it the fivefecta, you know, or I'm sure there are more things. It's like it makes my life so much better. And yet we have this perception that it's a negative thing, that it's deprivation or hard.
I completely agree with you, Laura. I have this conversation at least once a week with people in my life because I'm constantly like, well, I would say most of the people in my life are pretty eco-friendly, I will say, or have become more so. But sometimes people are like, why are you doing that? Like, you took so many steps to get to this one thing. You could have just done this instead. And I said, I enjoy this process. I met this person while I was getting my Facebook Marketplace, item from them, and I had a great chat. And I met somebody at my community garden, and I spent a few hours just hanging out there instead of, at home on my phone. And, the cost of convenience is the issue. We that has taken, speaking of community, that's taken us away from our community, right? Because we now depend on all these services and apps and things to take us away, yeah, from all the people that we normally would interact with, So I think that all these things are all tied together, and that cause of convenience just needs to be the discomfort that we might feel just needs to be reframed. And I think that over time we will have to do that as a society, like start seeing things as like this is a positive result, actually. Like, although we don't have, X anymore, we can do Y instead, and we can do so together instead of buying something. Now we borrow something from each other, or we do swap, like, appliance swaps or things like that. I think that it can also be really fun, and I don't think we talk about that enough.
I agree. The community piece is everything, because when I go out, like recently, I actually sold some old clothing on Facebook Marketplace, and it was just such a breeze being able to interact with people that I don't normally get to interact with, because when you're ordering stuff online and when you're pretty much boxed in and individualistic, it can get lonely sometimes, and it's not good for your mental health. And, I like going to, the farmer's market, the community garden, and, actually being able to bond, and not to mention the exercise that comes with gardening.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I direct us to the comment Julia just put in the chat? I don't know if I have great
Nope.
answers, but I think that's a really valid discussion that weighs on my mind a lot because
Let me read that one back, Laura, just that way for anybody who's just listening. So, Julie asked, I'd be interested to hear more about people's thoughts on looking to the future with accessibility in mind, as opposed to expecting people to stay able-bodied because aging equals becoming disabled. Or I will add, there's going to be a point when all of us are no longer able-bodied, whenever in our lives that comes. How can we make the world more accessible and sustainable at the same time? And before we answer that, I will note we're at 4:54, so we didn't start recording until 10 after. I'm happy to go for about another 15 or 20 minutes, and maybe we can start to answer some of these questions, still give our panel answers, but see if we have a couple of questions in the chat that we can cover too.
So I guess I can start with this one a little bit. For those who don't know, I'm also on my city's planning commission. So we talk a lot about zoning and accessibility and equity and that sort of thing. And things like housing and public transportation and those sorts of things is something that really is top of mind on this topic specifically. Especially in the United States, so many of us live very, very car-centered lives, and that only works as long as we can drive. And as soon as you can't drive, our lives are extraordinarily worse in much of this country because of that tether to vehicles. So this is definitely more than an individual resiliency thing, but, you know, show up to your community meetings, show up to those conversations, advocate for people being able to live in walkable, transit-oriented communities, because while that doesn't fix all the other things, if people can afford to live in places that they are not reliant on a vehicle at all times, it is something that as people age, as they become disabled, if they can't or any other thing, you know, if we can create our communities that work for more types of people and bodies, it doesn't solve everything, but it goes a long way to change someone's life from trapped at home, reliant on meal delivery and people taking them to their appointments, etc., to one where they can get around and still be fully present. So it's just one piece. Clearly, it's much larger than that, but it's something that I am really passionate about.
Yeah, I think that's great, Angela. I'm very delighted that you're doing that work. And I think, yeah, transit is in mobility is a big one. And I think the earlier we start thinking about this, you know, in our lives, the better. I mean, it's not sometimes the fun thing to think about, but I think given the realities of the world, it's something we need to think more and more about early on. And you know, when I first read the comment, I think it was more towards our bodies, you know, as we age, um, you know, becoming less able-bodied. But there are people, you know, already at a younger age that aren't able-bodied. And I think a lot about that. Um, and I don't have great answers, but I do think, you know, we've talked a lot about community, and I think, you know, the more we can get used to and comfortable with embedding ourselves in community, sharing resources, asking for help, helping others. I think that's a big part of it. You know, living in multi-generational households or situations, even if it's not birth families, I think is big. Intentional communities. But we don't all have to live on the same property or, you know, have it with our family. We can do it in our neighborhoods. Or even if you do eventually move to an intentional community, people think they have to wait to move to the intentional community to start building community. But you can build community right where you're at, and it will help you be, you know, thrive more in the intentional community once you get there. Because living in, again, as I said, being in community is a skill. And so for me, a big part of it, yeah, is just working on building those community muscles.
I have a thought, but I want to make sure Shalise has a moment because I think I saw you come off mute.
So I just was telling someone in the comments about these walkable cities. And I've started thinking to myself, in my area where I live right now, there has been proposal after proposal for having mass transit, you know, that makes it walkable and less reliant on cars. And the only reason we don't have that is it boils down to racism, point blank, period, because you know, the legislators, they try to have the mass transit, and then you've got the citizens saying, oh, well, we don't want the wrong element to be able to come out here. And so because of that, that's also driving up auto insurance rates, is increasing the emissions, not to mention it's increasing the accidents. And it actually increases the cost of everything when they're doing things like this. And so it's like a domino effect. You know, a lot of this stuff that we're dealing with not having walkable cities boils down, and it goes back to racism.
Yeah. If anyone wants to learn more about some of that history, especially with like zoning code and whatnot, I'm going to drop a link to, I think his name's Richard Rothschild's book, and the name is escaping me. But it's all about the history of redlining. And if you haven't read it, it is a fantastic book, and I recommend it to everyone, especially anyone who shows up and has an opinion on city planning.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go back to that the conversation about communities and being able-bodied and things like that, because I'm in the midst of trying to really kind of jump into that a little bit more right now. For those of you who are on Woven, you might have seen that I am likely to join my local Lions Club soon. And for those who don't know too much about me, I live in a rural area. I'm on the Oregon coast. It's very spread out. So generally, unless you live in a couple of the like little specific city enclaves, you need a car. I'm on acreage, which I love because I have space for my chickens and my fruit trees and our firewood, but it definitely makes it hard to meet and connect with people. And I've been trying to do a lot of my connecting via Facebook for a decade now, and no surprise, that's not going great. Um, and I'm also frustrated with Facebook and just want to be there as little as possible. And so I'm kind of trying to change up how I do things and looking at organizations and spaces in my local community where I do see things being represented and community activities occurring. I wanted something that was secular. There's a pretty progressive church that does a lot of cool stuff, but it wasn't where I really wanted to get my family involved. And the Lions Club seems to do a lot. So I've been looking into getting involved with them because it seems like they are very member driven. So if there are things that you want to do or see in your local community, and this is not intended to be a pitch for the Lions Club, this is just why I'm not a member yet, even why I'm looking at this group locally. But I thought this sounds like a good opportunity for me because I have a lot of ideas, but I don't really have the connections to try to get any of these things going. And like Laura said, community participation is a skill that you have to build, and I need to work on it more. And about like the being able-bodied and those types of elements, one of the things that's important for me is being more aware of showing up and trying to do things in multi-generational settings. So some of the things I brought up to the local Lions Club where I want to get like a free cycle day going. They have a thrift store and they don't want to be throwing things away that aren't selling or they can't take. But finding ways to do that and encourage other community members to come in and to get kids involved. I pitched a Skillshare type of session to and anytime I said it, I said, but with a focus on children and families and bringing different generations together. I feel like that's one thing that's particularly lacking in America is more opportunities for people of different ages to connect. And I'm like the old permanent old soul. I've always gotten along with older people better. I'm finally starting to feel connected with people my age now, in my late 30s, Angela. But I just haven't been able to make those connections locally, and that's who I'm really interested in trying to connect with more. They are a lot of the community members who could utilize my help. They're people who might need a ride to a doctor's appointment sometimes. So I think it's hard and unfortunate that we have to frame the conversation around what can I do right now? What can I do as somebody who's able-bodied? And it sucks because sometimes it feels like we're leaving the less abled out of the conversation. But I know from my perspective, it's about talking to a lot of the people who can do about what we can be out there doing, because we know that they may not have the same capacity as us, but we have to mobilize and get those conversations going. So I'm not expecting a lot out of people who can't. But it would be nice if there were more ways to interact so that we can find them, help them, get to know them, and have active relationships, because I know that things progress easier when there's a real human connection and it's not just transactional.
Right. And it goes back to what I constantly see the broke Black girl, Dasha, saying, and it's that generational wealth is not necessarily just money. And I would even take it a step further and say it's not just within our family, it's our community as a whole. Like when we talk about generational wealth, We're talking about me looking out for my elder neighbors, for instance, like it's not just within one family unit. And, I was thinking about, things I could do for older, people who are as able-bodied anymore. I could, think about the community kitchens, preparing their meals, helping with, you know, appointment setting and things of that nature, things that will actually help them to survive.
And if I can, I feel bad taking up too much time here since I have our panelists. The other thing I've brought up personally when I'm having these conversations for anyone who might be interested in trying to pitch a little bit more, which I know makes some of the people I'm talking to uncomfortable because these tend to be people who are already very active volunteers. They have a strong connection to that volunteerism spirit. But I say I'm trying to start doing some things that are for everyone in the community and aren't focused on people in need, which can sound a little like, ooh, like weird at first, but I say, but if we start focusing on things as a community, that includes everybody here. And I think if you can start to get people who don't visualize themselves as being in need and involved, then you start getting more of that two-way interaction because there's a lot of attitude from people who have a lot to give that they can, I mean, kind of like, the rich dad buying a lot of Christmas presents kind of thing. Like there's a lot more you can do with your presence than just like providing money or giving a bigger donation to the food pantry kind of a thing. And there's a whole swath of the community that maybe isn't at that bottom line where they are actually going to access services, people who can use a lot of help but might not feel in need. So trying to find ways to bring those groups together and get them more involved in conversations and moving more towards general reciprocity and involvement instead of this like transactional nonprofit fundraiser thing where you can just throw money at a problem.
Yeah, and like-minded activities too, right? Like you're saying, Regina, focus less on the people in need and kind of just focus on like the people who want to be in community and they just are doing whatever task or whatever activity they enjoy, like the community garden. I keep going back to this, but I just met a 73-year-old lady the other day and we had a chat for like an hour. And at the end of it, she asked me for my number. And I was like, of course, like I would love to stay in contact with you. And we had so many things in common, even though like generationally we have a wide gap. But I just feel like that is a great way to, make a connection. And she knows other people that are also, in her generation that are gardeners who we all have basically overlapping interests, and it's a great way to just keep keep involving each other, and that's why I love like third places like that, even though I know that we have less and less of them, but like libraries and like the library will have like different classes or skills things that you can do, and that's a great way to meet people. Or Julia had even mentioned in the chat about repair cafes, and that's like another, I would say, like a third place in essence. And I don't know, just trying to put yourself in those situations as much as possible. I understand that like it's not possible for everyone because of where you live, if you live in a more rural community like you do, Regina, but it's just like finding those when you can and kind of just frequenting them as much as possible.
Yeah. And for me, like creating opportunities where people feel comfortable showing up and it's not transactional. This does become slightly soapboxy, but like for me in a small town, it's very tourism oriented, and there's a lot of events that come in that are like meant to draw in tourists, and locals are invited to attend, but these tend to be highly transactional in nature. There might be a ticket price, or it's things that are occurring that it's at the restaurants, or it's like encouraging you to go shopping, and there's a whole bunch of people who aren't necessarily going to take part of that in that. So while there are like opportunities to get out there and get involved as a community member, with the disappearing third spaces that we have, it's like even a lot of the opportunities to show up and be in community still have like a highly transactional orientation. And I'm trying to find my own little ways, and that'll look different wherever you're at, but to create ongoing opportunities for community members of different ages to engage together, because the other part of it is it's not just a one-time thing. Like, especially me, I'm fairly introverted. Even if I don't know, again, it's still going to be framed as go to a coffee shop, right? Like still a place where I'm expected to buy something. But I'm probably not going to like make friends with somebody who lives here the second time I see them. I'm going to have to run into them 10 or 20 times the way I work to really like make a connection and move forward with it. And how can we find comfortable ways for people to just like be around other people, see something cool going on and decide to go check it out, where they don't feel like they have to go spend something to be a part of it. That's big for me. And I don't know what those are all going to look like, but I'm excited to keep exploring it. All right, somebody else.
So I
go
was
ahead,
just going to
Angela.
pop and just say for folks not following along with the chat, there's some common conversation about Robin Wall Kimmerer's The Serviceberry, which is very aligned with this whole conversation. So if you haven't read it yet, this is an unofficial plug to read it. I do want to say though that we are definitely over time and wanted to give everybody just like 2 more minutes to, say any final thoughts you've got, and then, I can hang around for a little bit longer if anybody in the chat has specific final questions.
Yes, and thank you all for being here today and hanging out a few minutes extra. Our conversations tend to do this. So any final thoughts? Shalise, Laura, Alexa?
Well, thanks for having me here, you guys. Thank y'all for inviting me.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for coming.
And I'm so glad the Serviceberry got mentioned, because that is a very much, when we talk about this framing of regenerative wealth, that is a great book to read to help you get in the mindset of what true regenerative and climate resilient wealth looks like. And I am just going to share, this isn't exactly in answer to Julia's question. What this link I just shared is my latest blog post. It's on climate resilient retirement planning. And so it's this whole new way, like what else do we need to be thinking about? And a lot of it is what we've discussed here. But, if that's of interest, I share that because it sounds like that's the way, kinds of questions that are percolating for people as they go deeper and deeper into this. And I really think that we need to rethink retirement planning completely on a climate challenged planet, along with wealth and many other
So
things.
we need to do this a part 2 where we talk about that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, just want to say thank you so much for having me. It was so great to have these conversations and hear all the different perspectives, even from the chat. That was so much fun. Just want to say that no matter where you are in your journey, as far as sustainability and wealth management goes, just know that a little goes a long way, and it's really the smallest steps that lead us to the future we're trying to build. And you don't have to beat yourself up over taking a misstep or anything like that. I think that we have to give ourselves grace as we're learning, and that's all we can do is just learn and keep pushing ourselves to be more creative and to slow down. I think more than anything is to before we're rushing to just get the next thing, or overcommit ourselves, like let's just think a little bit more before we make those choices, and just be considerate of our community and what our ultimate goals are.
And like Alexa just said, I'm pretty new to eco-frugality, because prior to that, I didn't really think in terms of what I purchased. And it's okay to be new and starting out and just now learning and, experimenting. It's okay, because when I first started, it was intimidating. And I used to beat myself up a lot over not knowing everything about being eco-frugal. And so seeing groups like Women's Personal Finance and following accounts make me feel better about being in the learning process and doing better, making progress. Progress is progress.
And it doesn't stop. It's a lifelong process. So
we're lifelong students.
I'm going to throw one last pitch in for the Serviceberry, because we mentioned that. For those of you who don't know, I don't read very much. I used to. doesn't work for my stage of life, mom brain, and every other thing. But I did read The Service Berry. It is quite short, very inspiring, and it is a lot about gifting and reciprocity. So for me, I think if I do need to purchase a gift for someone who I know reads, it is a perfect book to give, a gift about giving. I think is really kind of sweet, but I encourage you to check it out. I read it in about, I don't know, an hour and 20 minutes. And even that was with a lot of little distractions. So it's a short one. And I think most people who enjoy what WPF talks about would enjoy that. So we'll make sure to drop a link to that somewhere too. Did we have any other, well, before I jump into potential other questions, do any of our panelists need to jump off right away, or do we want to see if we have a couple more? We all good for another 5 or 10? All right. Angela, have you been watching if there's any other fun questions that we might want to cover?
Oh gosh, without like starting in a whole new like half-hour conversation is the tricky part. But
Well-
I really like the multi-gen conversation that's been going on in the comments about like really connecting with like who has a house and space and who has maybe the energy and whatnot. And you know, very small, not really multi-gen, but as like multi-household sort of thing. So for those who don't know, we have a pretty large garden in our front yard. And we have some friends that live in an apartment and they don't have a balcony or garden space or anything. And a couple of years ago, we actually invited them to build a raised bed in our front yard. And so they have like basically a mini community garden in our front yard. It's nothing official or anything, but around here, especially, a lot of the community gardens have like a 2 or 3 year wait list. And we said, you know what? We have space in our yard. If you want to build a bed and that one's yours, like this space is yours too. So I think really rethinking the like individual spaces, individual stuff, and how much of that can actually be community instead.
Side note, one of our more chaotic posts on Threads, if you're not following us there, it's exciting sometimes, was when we challenged like people retiring in large single family homes who are stressed about the future and retirement and said maybe you you remember this one.
I remember that one.
Like that maybe you should reconsider what your living situation looks like. And it's interesting sometimes to put out some of these questions and like see just how defensive people get when you bring it up. And it's also like a complete counterpoint to how it feels in our WPF private spaces. So sometimes we forget how far out there maybe we are, and then we ask a question to the big wide internet, and we get reminded what a wonderful group of people have gathered around women's personal finance, that we can have these conversations even if maybe they don't apply to us or our stage of life yet, that we have a lot of people willing to explore that and think deeper about what that might mean rather than vehemently defend certain positions. So I do see Sandra with your hand up. Sandra, what is your question or comment?
Okay. Hi, everybody. I was just going to sort of piggyback off of what Alexa said earlier about the 73-year-old woman that she encountered in the community garden. And I think that's one of the things that I like on Woven is because I get to encounter these conversations with women of all different ages and walks of life. And that was something that when I was growing up, I had a friend when I was in high school that was a grandmother, and we became really good friends. And I learned so much from her. She was more than just like a grandmother to me. She was really she treated me like a friend. And so throughout my life, I always had older friends and mentors, not just my own age. And I think the internet, when maybe it was you, Angela, earlier, had mentioned things that the internet has done, good and bad. That's one of the things that the internet has done that wasn't good, is it really siloed us into dealing only with people of our own ages. And so I'm hoping that things like this can help us get back to being able to interact, not just in real life, but even online with people who just other people and of all different walks of life, ages, and because we have valuable things to share with one another. And I think that that's one of the great things that, we can open ourselves up to. So I loved hearing that today, especially from when Alexa said that, because you could probably learn a lot from her gardening skills, and there are things you can offer her. And I love all these things, and I'm still mobile, but there'll become a day where I'm not. And I love all these sharing ideas, and so I would just wanted to throw that out.
And Sandra, was that you who also just met up with one of our, I think, younger end of the
Yes.
scale woven members locally too?
Absolutely. Yes, this morning, as a matter of fact, she was on earlier. I met up with one
Sunny.
of
Yeah.
Sunny, yes, Suni, with her, and she graduated college just a couple of years ago. So I'm going to be 67 in June. So, we obviously have a huge difference in age, and we had the best breakfast. And then she invited me to come over to her parents' store. She had to go to work after. She said, "Come over. It's really slow on Sunday mornings." And we chatted for another hour in the store. And it was really nice, to meet her in person. You meet someone on the internet, and then you get to meet them in real life. And again, as I said earlier, we had so much in common, as different as our lives are, ages, lives, but yet we had so much in common as women. And it was just really sweet. It was really nice. And she's like, "Yeah, when you come down this way again, we'll meet up again," because I'm camping down the Cape this week, and she lives down the Cape, so we're about an hour apart. And yeah, it was just really nice. So it fed exactly into all of this tonight, and I think we all have so much to share and to learn from one another, and it's nice to get back to that. So anyway, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sandra. All right. Anyone else before we wrap up? Feel free to unmute for a moment if you'd like.
If not, I think Sandra did a great job like wrapping it up to like both the like in person and we clearly are online community builders here, but like I do a lot of the like in-person community stuff in my neighborhood, from people who have lived in my neighborhood for over 40 years to the person who just moved in next door last month. And I think there's value in all of it, in having the like really deep local in-person connections and the ones online that and then when you do get to meet up in person, each other, and so it's you get to skip. Regina was talking about how when you meet somebody new in person, it takes a couple of times to get to that place of
Or
being
20.
able to, or yeah, but when you get to know people online, you can have those 20 conversations. Regina, I think, how many years did we know each other before we even met up in person? Like, it was years. But then the first time we got to see each other in person, it was just like, we were hanging out next to each other rather than, across the Pacific Northwest. So I think there's something really fun about that crossover.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you again. And again, thank you to our panelists, Alexa, Laura, and Shalise. This will go up on YouTube at some point, so we'll make sure to include links to your platforms if you like, just if people want to get in touch with you. And
we'll include links to all the books.
Yeah.
That was The Color of Law that I couldn't remember, and his name is Rothstein, not Rothschild, but I was close or something.
And I'm sure we will be seeing you all around in our social media lives, and we definitely enjoy you all. So we will chat later in one way or another. Yeah, Alexa dropped some links in the chat real quick. If Laura or Shalise feel like doing that, by all means, go ahead and do that before we close up.
And I will also put all those up when I upload the video. So don't feel like you have to grab it now and then it's gone forever.
And thank you again to our audience members as well. Everybody have a great end to their Sunday evening. And we'll keep up this conversation, not this specific one, but our ongoing Eco-Frugal Month stuff on Woven, and then some other stuff on our general social media. So thanks, everybody. And let's see. All right, we had Shalise had a chance there. Are you good, Laura? Anything you want to drop before we go?
I'll just do my, let's see. Brilliant. There, that's for me on
Yeah.
Instagram and TikTok. And my, if
Yeah.
you want me on YouTube, it's just my name, Laura Oldaney.
And then I will drop all these links up on YouTube. So I have all your stuff.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm
Thank
gonna
you,
hit
everyone.
stop.
So much. Have a
Thank
good
you,
one.
guys.
Thank you for organizing this. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.